I know why they shouldn't be married. I'm speaking now so I won't have to forever hold my peace. Why did she have to marry him for anyway?
Because I love him.
I thought she loved me.
I do, Opie.
Don't catch me marrying somebody else.
Most people remember the town in the Andy Griffith Show as a place where nothing ever went wrong. But if you look closer, you see it wasn't always as perfect as it seemed.
He was there all the time, and they were always stressing character, and Andy used to kill jokes if they were too broad, and he just kept saying, the South is plenty funny on its own.
Sometimes, the camera caught things that were never meant to be seen. Now, these weren't just ordinary bloopers. They were moments that survived the final edit, leaving us to wonder, how could such a famous show let these mistakes slip through unnoticed? Stay with us as we reveal the hidden side of Mayberry that the producers never wanted you to see. The legendary show. To understand why the bloopers on this show matter, you first have to understand just how phenomenal the show truly was. The Andy Griffith Show was not just another sitcom back in the day, it was a cultural force that reshaped how television families were shown to the public. We are talking about a show that never left top 10 ratings for years, earning a level of trust very few shows ever reach. The show is about Andy Taylor, a kind and wise sheriff, raising his young son, Opie, in the quiet town of Mayberry. It first aired in 1960, and before long, it became a favorite across America. Families would gather around their televisions every evening, drawn to its warmth, gentle humor, and small-town charm. But here's the thing. Behind the scenes of this legendary show, things didn't always go as planned. But because the show was so popular and loved by many, viewers expected everything to be perfect. Every detail, every scene had to feel flawless. So when little mistakes slipped through, it almost seemed impossible. And that's exactly what makes these bloopers so fascinating. Once you start noticing them, you begin to see Mayberry in a whole new light. The vanishing globe. The Andy Griffith Show always looked perfect on screen. But here's the truth. The early days of the show were anything but smooth and perfect. In the very first episode, The New Housekeeper, the crew was still figuring things out. Sets were unfinished. Camera angles were being tested. Andy's house had to feel real, like a place people truly lived in. And while they were racing to get everything ready, a small mistake slipped through that fans would later spot right away. Now, the moment happens in Opie's bedroom during a father-son scene. On the table beside his bed sits a globe, the kind many kids kept in their rooms back then. Then the camera cuts to Andy while he speaks. And after just a few seconds, the shot returns to Opie, but somehow the globe is suddenly gone. In fact, sitting in its place is a lamp that was never there before. This sudden switch leaves viewers wondering what just happened. Well, the answer is simple. This was a pilot episode, and those shoots were fast and messy. Crews were still testing a lot of things during the filming process. Furniture and props were moved all day long to fix glare or shadows. So between those two shots, someone probably noticed the globe reflecting light and decided to swap it for a lamp. Interestingly, mistakes like this were not seen as a problem back then. Producers believed viewers would stay focused on the story and the actors, not the small objects in the background. Also, most people watched on tiny televisions where details were hard to spot anyway. So no one stopped to worry about a globe turning into a lamp mid-scene, because they assumed nobody would notice. But that tiny slip stands out today in a way it never could back then. Today, fans can pause the screen, rewind the moment, and scan every inch of the shot. What most viewers once watched without a second thought has now turned into one of the show's most talked about bloopers. And in a funny way, It reveals how fast those early episodes of The Andy Griffith Show were filmed and just how much the entire TV experience has changed since the 1960s. But the disappearing globe is only the beginning. In the sheriff's office, objects don't always stay put, and some props seem to shift, as if on their own. The moving radiator. The missing globe in Opie's room was easy to shrug off. But over at the courthouse, the show pulled off something far more confusing. Now, the sheriff's office, where Andy handled the town's problems, was the heart of the series. In fact, after just a few episodes, the place felt familiar, like a room viewers themselves had spent time in. This is exactly why what comes next feels unsettling. In episodes like Stranger in Town, the background didn't stay the same. Props and furniture moved or disappeared between shots, making the set feel unpredictable in ways fans could never have noticed when the show first aired. In this scene, a big iron radiator and a brass spittoon will draw your attention. They looked heavy, so you'd automatically expect them to stay in one place. But somehow, they kept moving. In one moment, the radiator rested against the wall behind Andy's desk. Then the camera cuts to Barney for a second, and when it comes back, the radiator has slid to another part of the room. In fact, in a few scenes, it vanishes completely, leaving an empty wall where the radiator had just been. This isn't really a mistake, though. It was just how TV sets worked in the 1960s. Studios had to fit giant cameras and bright lights into very small spaces, so walls and even large props were built to be moved or removed quickly. If the director needed a wider shot, the crew would simply slide the radiator out of the way. It wasn't about keeping the room neat. It was about making sure every scene could be filmed the way they wanted. And that's where the real slip happened. Now and then, the crew forgot to put the radiator back in the same spot for the next take. The visible equipment. Back in the 1960s, viewers were not just watching The Andy Griffith Show, they literally felt like they were visiting a real town every week. For the crew behind the cameras, keeping this feeling alive was their top priority, because they had to make the audience believe Mayberry was a real, breathing town in North Carolina. And to pull this off, the crew worked tirelessly to ensure the audience never saw the studio hiding behind the scenery, meaning no cables creeping into view, no lights hanging overhead, and no technicians drifting through the background. For years, the crew was able to pull this off, except for one moment in the episode The Mayberry Band. In this scene, the town gathers in the street for a musical celebration. Neighbors fill the sidewalks. Andy Taylor stands at the center, holding a bright brass tuba. Now, when viewers first watched this episode back in 1962, nothing seemed unusual. But years later, when the show was restored and released in high-quality digital versions, that same moment looked different, and the tuba Andy was holding suddenly stood out. With sharper picture quality, viewers could now see tiny details that were impossible to notice before. And what those details revealed stunned everyone. Now, the smooth metal surface was acting like a mirror. And instead of only reflecting the street of Mayberry, it appeared to catch flashes of the studio itself. The reason comes down to one simple thing. Its smooth bell acts like a curved mirror. At just the right moment, if you pause the screen, what stares back at you is not North Carolina at all. It is a busy soundstage in California. Honestly, once you catch this, it's impossible to unsee it. You can see a camera operator leaning into a giant lens. A few crew members stand nearby, probably waiting for the next take, dressed in work clothes from the era and looking like they have been there all day. Just like that, the peaceful street is replaced by metal stands, thick cables, and people hustling to keep the show moving. It was an entire behind-the-scenes moment caught by accident. Well, at the time, the editors didn't worry about it. They knew that the television sets then were too fuzzy to reveal that much detail. To viewers at home, it was just a shiny instrument. They couldn't pause the show, zoom in, or see every reflection. Even though it is just a small slip, it gives us a chance to peek behind the curtain and changes how you watch the scene. But the tuba was only the beginning. Sometimes the tools of television did not just show up in reflections. Sometimes they wandered straight into the shot. Barney's wired leg. The more you watch The Andy Griffith Show, the more little details start to stand out. Now, this show thrives on conversations. And what makes people laugh isn't big stunts or action scenes. What makes people laugh comes from the way the characters talk and react to each other. Those conversations are the heart of the show, and the sound crew had to capture every single word perfectly. Back in the early 60s, this was no small task. It's not like today, where actors can wear tiny wireless microphones that are almost invisible. Back then, the equipment was much bigger and difficult to hide. The crew had two choices. Either they held a long boom pole over the actors or ran a wire directly on them. In the episode Opie the Birdman, they went with the wire. This scene is one of the most emotional in the series. It's a moment where the audience is supposed to focus on a life lesson between a father and his son. But as Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, walks across the room, something that didn't belong to the scene was revealed. If you look closely at the back of his right leg, you can see a thick, dark cord running straight up his pants. This wasn't a shadow, and it wasn't part of his costume. It was the microphone cable. To capture clear sound while Barney was moving, the crew ran the wire up his leg and under his shirt. Normally, the fabric of his suit would hide it, but Barney Fife was a very active character. He moved with a jerky, precise rhythm, and in this take, the movement pulled the fabric tight against the wire, making it visible. It's a funny, but also a little unsettling thing to notice in such a serious scene. Moments like this remind us that making TV back then was harder than most people realize. The actors weren't just memorizing lines, they were moving through a set full of heavy equipment and wires that could pop out at any moment. This shows how much work went into making Mayberry feel like a paradise. Anti-B double stunt. Sometimes the bloopers in Mayberry were not about the equipment at all. Sometimes they were about the people you see on screen. One of the most beloved characters on the show was Aunt B, played by actress Frances Bavière. She was the heart of the Taylor family, like the mother figure everyone could rely on. She was always calm, and you almost always saw her wearing a nice dress and a bonnet. Because she seemed so sweet and fragile, you would never expect to see her doing anything risky, like stunt driving. But in the episode Aunt B Learns to Drive, the producers ran into a major problem. The scene required Aunt B to drive a car through the streets of Mayberry. Frances Bavière could handle the shots where the car was parked or moving very slowly, but for the faster shots, the producers were worried about her safety. They didn't want to risk an accident, so they had to find another solution. And instead of searching for a woman who was the same size as Aunt B, they decided to hire a male stunt driver. To make him look like Aunt B from a distance, the wardrobe team dressed him in a floral dress. They even added a gray wig and tied Aunt B's bonnet under his chin. At the time, the plan worked perfectly. The camera was far away, the car was moving, and most viewers never noticed the switch. But today, thanks to technology, we can see the man behind the wheel. His shoulders are much broader than Aunt B's. In fact, his body shape is completely different. Once you notice him sitting there in that dress, it is just impossible to unsee. The Seattle-Raleigh trip. Well, we all know that one of the major things that makes a TV show feel real is the location. The audience needs to actually believe the characters are where the story says they are. In The Andy Griffith Show, the big city closest to Mayberry was always Raleigh, North Carolina. Whenever Andy or Barney needed to take care of serious business, they headed to Raleigh. To viewers, it felt like the city was just down the road. It was the place that made Mayberry feel connected to the rest of the world. But in the episode Andy and Barney in the Big City, something quite funny happened with this location. In this episode, Andy and Barney take a business trip to Raleigh to speak with a state official about getting better equipment. They check into a hotel and get wrapped up in a mystery about a jewel theft. Because of this, they spend most of their time in the big city. Now, at the beginning of the episode, the filmmakers show a city skyline to let viewers know the characters have arrived in Raleigh. But here's the twist. Instead of filming the real Raleigh skyline, they used a pre-shot clip of a city from somewhere else. Back then, it was common to use old footage like this instead of sending a camera crew to a specific city. It saved time and money. But the problem is that the skyline they showed is not Raleigh at all. In fact, as the camera moves across the buildings, a very famous landmark appears. The Space Needle, which is the most famous building in Seattle, Washington, pops into view. If you have ever seen a picture of Seattle or been there, you know exactly what it looks like. The Space Needle is almost 3,000 miles away from Raleigh. For a few seconds, Andy and Barney are not in the South. They are technically in the Pacific Northwest. Mistakes like this were much easier to make back then than you might think. Editors worked with real pieces of film, and they were often under pressure to finish an episode in just a few days. If a piece of film was labeled wrong, or if the editor did not recognize the buildings, that footage could end up in the final show. At the time, most people had no way to check what a real skyline looked like, so the producers assumed no one would notice. Today, we see these moments, and they make us laugh. It makes you wonder what the editor was thinking when they picked that shot, or if anyone on the set ever realized they were using the wrong city. If the editors could miss a landmark 3,000 miles away, it's no wonder they overlooked a tiny spelling error hiding in plain sight on the streets of Mayberry's favorite shop. The misspelled pharmacy. We all know that in a small town, details matter. In fact, that was the whole point of Mayberry. It was a place where the grass was always cut, the porches were always swept, and people took pride in everything they did. Those tiny, handcrafted details were exactly what helped make the town feel real to millions of people watching at home. One of the most popular spots in Mayberry was the town pharmacy. This wasn't just a store, it was a place where people grabbed a soda, picked up their mail, or leaned against the glass to gossip about the latest news. Because it was used so often, the set had to look very real. However, if you look closely at the pharmacy window in almost any season, you'll notice a hand-painted sign advertising photo enlargements. It was meant to look professional, but there is a glaring mistake right in the middle. The word enlargements is actually missing a letter. Instead of E-N-L-A-R-G-E-M-E-N-T-S, it is spelled E-N-L-A-R-G-M-E-N-T-S. The E after the G is simply gone. What makes this even more surprising is that this sign wasn't just a temporary prop. It was painted directly onto the permanent glass of the town set. This means that for dozens of episodes and across multiple seasons, the spelling error stayed quietly in the background. It's surprising when you notice it because it makes you wonder, how did nobody on set catch this mistake? Not the producers, not the painter, not the cast, and not even the actors standing just a few feet away. Many of them probably passed that sign 100 times, yet nobody saw it. Of course, it's easy to imagine the painter missing it, but what happened to the rest of the crew? Well, That's probably because the crew members are always busy and too focused on meeting deadlines. Crew members often worked long hours and stayed up all night just to get the set ready for the next day. At the same time, the actors were focused on remembering their lines, and because everyone was working so hard and so fast, they probably just stopped looking at the background. In the end, it is just a very human mistake. The floating key. If you think the bloopers in the Mayberry courthouse are finished, well, think again. Because this time, there's another slip-up that's almost impossible to miss once you know it's there. This one has to do with something called continuity. That's just the professional way of saying that things need to stay in the same place from one shot to the next. For instance, if an actor is wearing a hat in one shot, he shouldn't suddenly be bareheaded a second later. In the episode Sheriff Barney, the camera focuses on a very important prop, a single jail cell key. The key is resting on a wooden railing right in front of the jail cells. Now, in the first shot, we see a wide view of the room, and the key is lying flat on the wood. But when the camera cuts to a close-up, the key is suddenly standing straight up, leaning against the bars. Then, just a few seconds later, the camera cuts back to the wide view, and the key is lying flat again. This probably happened because back then crew didn't just roll the camera from start to finish. Instead, they filmed the same scene over and over from different angles. They might spend the morning filming wide shots, take a break for lunch, and then come back to film close-ups in the afternoon. And by the time they got to the close-up of the key, the person who originally placed it was likely on the other side of the room, and someone else probably thought it would look better standing up. They were just trying to make the shot look perfect. But they didn't realize that moving it just a few inches would create a blooper that stayed in the show forever. Even though it's just a tiny piece of metal, this moving key shows how easy it is for the flow of a TV set to break when too many people are trying to fix the same thing. It's a small mistake, yes, but it makes you smile or laugh once you notice it. The fake law books. For those familiar with the show, you know the camera often lingers on Andy Taylor while he sits at his desk in the courthouse. In the episode The Bookie Barber, the walls behind him are lined with rows of thick, impressive law books. These shelves were more than just props. They were meant to show viewers that even though Andy was a relaxed man, he was also a professional who understood the law. The books gave his office a sense of history and authority. However, if you look closely at those shelves today, you will notice something surprising. Most of those books aren't actually books at all. Instead, they are solid blocks of wood. If you look at the top of the books, you can actually see the wooden grain where the paper pages are supposed to be. This was actually a clever trick that TV crews often used in the 1960s. Real law books were very expensive back then. Also, filling those long shelves with heavy, leather-bound books would have been a huge problem. The weight might have caused the shelves to bend in the middle, or even collapse entirely. So using solid blocks of wood kept the set safe and stable, while also saving the show a lot of money. To pull this off, the crew reportedly cut long pieces of wood to look like the spines of books, and attached them neatly to the shelves. They also painted them dark brown to look like leather, and added gold lettering for the titles. From a distance, the effect was perfect. While Andy and the other actors spoke in front of the camera, the background was slightly out of focus, so viewers at home could never tell the difference. The unexplained hand bandage. In the episode The County Nurse, or Cousin Virgil, you might notice something very unusual about Andy Taylor's hand. In almost every scene, the sheriff has a big, white bandage wrapped around his right hand. The wrap is large and very easy to see, covering both his hand and his wrist. What makes it very unsettling is that the show never truly explains why it is there in those episodes. During the Cousin Virgil episode, Andy goes about his day as usual. He talks to the nurse, visits his neighbors, and handles town business. But nobody ever asks what happened to him. It is almost as if the bandage doesn't exist, even though it is right there in front of the camera for the entire episode. However, the writers tried to fix it in a later episode where Andy casually mentioned he got into a tussle while bringing in some prisoners. But even with his brief explanation, the bandage remains a massive continuity headache. In some scenes, the directors tried to hide his hand behind his desk or used camera angles to focus only on his left side. The real story behind the bandage actually has to do with a very bad day on the set. According to the cast, Andy Griffith got frustrated during filming and punched a hard wall. The accident hurt his hand so badly that it was impossible to hide the injury or make it look normal for the camera. You might think the producers would have stopped filming or changed the script to explain the bandage further, but they didn't. Because they were working on a tight schedule, they couldn't afford to stop or change the script. They simply had to keep the cameras rolling. Moments like this may be part of what still makes the show feel so special today. They silently remind viewers that Mayberry was built to feel human. A place where even small mistakes could slip through and somehow add to the charm. This lingering warmth leads to a bigger question. What is it about this old North Carolina town that still pulls at people's hearts after all these years? And why are new generations still discovering their way back to Mayberry? This legacy of The Andy Griffith Show. Today, more than 60 years have passed since filming on The Andy Griffith Show ended. And yet, the show is still going strong. People still watch it, talk about it, and share it with younger generations who were not even alive when it first aired. After 8 seasons and 249 episodes, Mayberry did not fade away. Instead, it settled into television history for good. Don Knotts, who played Deputy Barney Fife, and Frances Bavier, who portrayed Aunt Bee, together earned 6 Emmy Awards for their supporting performances. Also, the show's success did not stop when production ended. Reruns began almost immediately, and year after year, new networks kept bringing the series back, allowing parents to introduce it to their children and grandchildren. With spin-offs and constant replays, Andy and his neighbors stopped feeling like television characters. They began to feel like permanent residents of American culture. Over time, it has become easier to see how the town of Mayberry was really made. It only seemed perfect because real people were working behind the scenes every day. Cast, painters, camera crews, and writers all worked together to create the calm, friendly world. If they had not kept everything running smoothly, the illusion would have fallen apart. So, why are we talking about these bloopers after so many years have passed? Is it to prove that the show wasn't perfect? No, not at all. We spot the wrong city in the background or the man in a dress because those moments actually make Mayberry feel more real. We don't love The Andy Griffith Show because it was flawless. We love it because we can see the work that went into every single scene. We can see the small mistakes that happen when people are trying their very best. A busy crew in California worked tirelessly to create a safe, happy world for millions of viewers. Those bloopers are just gentle reminders of how much care and effort went into it. Every time a name changes, an actor ends up in the wrong spot, or a prop mysteriously resets itself, you are seeing more than a mistake. You are seeing the people who built this world with their hands and hearts. Mayberry was never a real town on a map. It was a dream created by ordinary people. Even with its flaws, it remains a place that so many of us want to visit, even if it's just for a few minutes on a television screen. Which of these bloopers did you spot first? And is there a blooper we missed that always bothered you? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.